Hello and welcome to the Circular Economy 101 webinar. We're delighted to have so many of you with us this evening. My name is Rachel Sharp and I'm joined here today by Doug Simpson. We're both Circular Economy advisors at ReLondon and we'll be your hosts for the event this evening. And before we dive in and hear from the first of our speakers, I wanted to spend a few minutes setting the scene for tonight's event. So the webinar this evening is a ReLondon production. ReLondon, as many of you will know, is a statutory body formed as a partnership between London's local authorities and the Mayor of London to improve waste and resource management and transform the city into a leading low-carbon circular economy. Until earlier this year, we were known as the London Waste and Recycling Board. Our priority audiences are London's businesses, local authorities and citizens. We empower businesses to embrace circularity. We provide boroughs with expert practical advice to help London live more sustainably, reduce waste and recycle more. And we inspire London's citizens and communities to change their behaviour. As part of the support that we provide to London's local authorities, ReLondon is launching a training academy. We were hearing from local authorities that they need a greater, more practical understanding of the circular economy, its benefits, and how to apply it across their business and service activities. And so in response, we've developed a series of practical, expert-led training activities. And this webinar this evening, the Circular Economy 101, is one of the training activities that we've developed to support local authorities to embed the circular economy into everything they do. Now, before we begin, I want to gauge via a short poll where your local authority is on its circular economy journey. So you'll shortly see a poll pop up in front of you with four answer boxes, and I'd like to invite you to choose the one response that most accurately applies to your local authority. So I'll give you 10 seconds to choose one response that most accurately applies to your local authority, and we'll close the poll. I should say this poll is anonymous. So we'll close the poll shortly. Last chance to choose your answer, closing the poll shortly. Where are you on your circular economy journey now? Okay, closing the poll, results are in. Thank you to those who participated. So we've got some spread across the answer categories, which is nice to see. So some of you saying that you're at the first step in your circular economy journey, starting out. Others of you a little further along, perhaps taking action at a small scale. Some of you already taking action at a large scale, embedding circular economy across the council. Well, wherever you are on your journey, we've got some great content lined up for you today. Over the next hour, you will learn more about the circular economy and the 5 circular economy business models that ReLondon advocates for. We'll explore the benefits of the circular economy and how it can help you deliver on your core local authority priorities. We'll also get practical, thinking about how the circular business models can be applied both in the community and also across local authority policy, programmes and functions. And we'll end the session today by setting out what further training activities are available from ReLondon. So we've got an action-packed agenda this evening with 3 expert speakers. We're going to kick off with a presentation from Wayne Hubbard, Chief Executive Officer at ReLondon, who's going to give an introduction to the circular economy and its benefits for local authorities. Then we'll hear from 2 London local authorities. First, Victoria Lawson, who's Executive Director for Environment, Culture and Customer Services at the London Borough of Hounslow. And Victoria will talk about how Hounslow is taking a circular economy approach and how it's helping to stimulate a green recovery and green economy. And then we'll hear from Keith Townsend, Corporate Director of Environment and Regeneration at the London Borough of Islington, who will talk about Islington's Circular Economy Action Plan and some of the tangible actions they're taking to embed circular business models across the council. Now, throughout the presentations, we'd like to encourage you to put questions in the chat box as they emerge for you. And there'll be an opportunity towards the end of the webinar this evening to put some of those questions to our speakers. So I'm really pleased to hand over to the first of our speakers, Wayne Hubbard from ReLondon, for an introduction to the circular economy and its benefits for local authorities. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi there, everybody. Yes, my name's Wayne Hubbard. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ReLondon. I'm just going to take you through a canter through what the circular economy is. And I probably will talk about what it isn't as well. So hopefully by the end of these next few slides, for those of you who are on the start of your journey, you'll have a very good basic knowledge of what the circular economy is and hopefully what it isn't. So let's just crack on. I'm just going to talk about why the circular economy is important, what it is, and then Doug will take over and talk about how to apply the circular economy. So just in terms of the strategic context for London, and I'm sure many other cities have a similar context, there's a variety of targets around climate in relation to net zero targets. In London, we have a target around recycling of municipal waste. We also have targets around cutting of food waste and also not sending biodegradable waste to landfill. Lots of London local authorities have declared climate emergencies and have committed to becoming net zero councils. And interestingly as well, and I think this is, I would say unique, but I stand to be corrected. London, through its local authorities, is committed to reducing its consumption-based emissions, and I'll talk about those in a minute, by 2/3 by 2030, which is actually a massive undertaking and, you know, in many ways, quite a revolutionary target to set. But we'll talk about that in a moment. And of course, all of this is about the economy. So this is about helping our recovery from the pandemic, but it's also about replacing our linear, old-fashioned, essentially dirty economy with a 21st century forward-looking, efficient and mostly high-tech economy, but not exclusively so. I just want to talk about how the circular economy relates to greenhouse gas emissions. And there's been a lot of work around this. Two studies in particular stand out. There's one by the Ellen MacArthur, or for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that was undertaken by a consultancy called Material Economics, called Completing the Picture, which identified that something like 45% of the world's carbon emissions come from making products in a way that it's very difficult to mitigate by changing energy systems. So things like the built environment and food in particular. You can't just flick a switch, turn on a renewable energy source, and those carbon emissions go away. We need behaviour change to change those carbon emissions. The second piece of work is by the C40 cities and Arup, who identified what's really showing on this slide, that consumption emissions account for a significantly larger amount of total emissions than territorial emissions. So consumption emissions are those that are allocated towards the end user of a product or service and relate to the entire emissions associated with extraction, production, transport, use and disposal of that thing. Territorial emissions are point source emissions within a defined boundary. So consumption emissions extend beyond the boundary of your city. And if you look at it through this lens, you'll see that most global north cities are pretty responsible for a significant amount of emissions driven by demand. So those two studies together, that products account for 45% of global emissions and cities are responsible for, in a large part, the demand for those products, makes it important, therefore, that cities take some action on behaviour change. And the circular economy offers us a way to do that in a way that it is regenerative, generates jobs, but also it doesn't feel like you're wearing an environmental hair shirt. It kind of it squares the circle of how to reduce carbon emissions, but at the same time thrive economically. And so, as you can see from this slide, we believe the circular economy offers local authorities a range of benefits, not just those associated with the environmental side, but also around job creation. It's about the new forward-looking 21st century economy. It's about resource efficiency. And there's also, I think, a large measure of a just transition here, because the circular economy is almost by definition redistributive. So we redistribute, I don't know, furniture or tech or food. So these things are part of the circular economy business models, which I'm going to go on to now. I'm going to just talk about this, this diagram first. This is often referred to as the butterfly diagram, and many of you will have seen this. And all it's really trying to do is show the linear economy, the so-called linear economy, through the middle of this diagram, which shows extraction through to disposal. And that's essentially how the industrialized North has dealt with stuff, certainly, you know, since the latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st century. The circular economy are those wings, those loops, where stuff on the right-hand side, the so-called technical side, stuff is reused, recycled, remanufactured, and on the left, the biological side, it's put back into a more regenerative use. So that's essentially the circular economy. Meaningfully, you know, how do you apply that? So we use these 5 circular economy business models, which comes from work, a piece of work that was done by looking at manufacturing industries, mostly automotive. But I think these are quite good illustrations of what the circular economy is. And often you'll see these essential business models being talked about in a variety of contexts, but think of them as essentially the core of the circular economy. And we explain them as this: making things well, so designed for durability, making things last so that they can be repaired and reused. Using stuff wisely, so making things recyclable and minimizing where possible the amount of waste in the production process. They're very kind of waste management-y style things that you would traditionally think of as part of the circular economy. As we start to move out, there are other business models which become less about waste management, but are essentially about reducing resource use. So renting, not buying, leasing, subscription, where products remain in the ownership of the organization that's lending you or you're leasing the product from. They are inherently, therefore, repairable because it becomes the onus of the company that's doing the lending to make sure those products have a longer life and there's no built-in obsolescence. Sharing. You know, you'll see lots of apps around food waste apps like Olio, or libraries of things where tools are shared. So sharing and the sharing economy is central to this, and making sure that stuff can be used again at the end of its life. So just to recap, making stuff reusable, making stuff recyclable, making stuff designed well so that it's repairable and can be reused again, sharing and renting. Those 5 business models are essentially what we regard as the core of the circular economy. Now, I just want to say, before I pass on to Doug, the circular economy isn't just about waste management. Waste management is really important, but in a sense, when something becomes waste, it's kind of a lost opportunity for us to have to go out there and fish it out of the waste stream and recycle it. Ideally, renting, leasing, and repairing would prevent stuff from becoming waste in the first place. So I just want to get that message across. You can't just label good waste management practices the circular economy. They're certainly part of it, but the circular economy is much more than that, much more encompassing. And if you're looking at this from a waste management perspective, you may well be missing out some of those more interesting business models upstream. I'm going to hand over to Doug, so happy to take questions at the end of the presentations.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. And I've just got 3 case studies now to quickly take you through. And really, this is just to really reiterate the point that Wayne's making around interventions that can prevent materials and assets becoming waste in the first place. So 3 case studies. The first one we have is the London Food Alliance. This is a combination of 3 charities that have formed together during the COVID-19 pandemic, using borough hubs to coordinate and distribute surplus food to those in need. So this example is the Felix Project. They're one of the charities involved. The business model is using stuff wisely, so it hasn't become a waste in the first place. And in this case, in 2020 alone, the Felix Project distributed 21 million meals and also rescued in the process just under 8,500 tonnes of food, a staggering number in that sense. The second case study is from the City of London, where they upgraded staff IT assets, around about 2,000 units, laptops, screens, tablets, etc. And these were sent for refurbishment. They are remarketed, repurposed, and in some cases recycled up at Hewlett Packard's plant in Scotland. And together with a few other organisations that did this with Hewlett Packard, they were able to divert just under 25,000 tonnes of waste from landfill and avoid just under 325,000 tonnes of CO2. And this is a really good example of the impact you can have by scaling up these types of activities. Electrical waste has a lot of embodied carbon within it. You think of the precious metals and the materials in there. By avoiding that materials becoming waste, you are having a huge impact on climate change and resource efficiency. And the last case study I have is a transport one. This is from the city of Hamburg. The business model is using stuff again. And in this case, the city of Hamburg have actually put a specific requirement in their contract document for the use of reclaimed asphalt pavement ahead of virgin materials and bitumen, etc. In this case, they had a pretty decent cost saving, 20,000 euros, compared with sourcing virgin materials. In this case, they're able to source those materials from other projects where they had excess concrete and other asphalt products. And they also saw other benefits around reduced emissions and improved health conditions for some of the operating staff, and not surprisingly of importance to London, less nuisance for residents and businesses during these high-scale projects. So just some of the examples of what the circular economy looks like on the ground. I haven't spoken about renting and sharing economy because I know that our speakers are going to be speaking around that. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag for that one. So I'll pause there and hand back to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Great to hear those practical examples of the circular economy business models being implemented on the ground. Now on to our next speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Victoria Lawson from the London Borough of Hounslow. Victoria is going to talk about how the circular economy is being implemented in Hounslow and how it can help stimulate a green recovery and green economy. Over to you, Victoria.
Thanks, and thank you for inviting me to talk. It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm just going to go through the work that we've been doing at the London Borough of Hounslow. I'm going to set it in the context of the work that we've been doing to stimulate a green recovery. So as Wayne said, we're trying to look at this in circular economy in the broadest possible context. I'll also go through where we've started in our journey on circular economy, and also give you an outline of some of the work that we've been doing across West London. So a big thank you to our West London Climate Officers Group for their work on circular economy that I'm going to share, and to Andrew Hagger in particular at Richmond and Wandsworth, who's been leading it. So just to put it into a bit of context, so Hounslow, like many boroughs across London, was significantly impacted by COVID, and we had a broad range of economic impacts. For those of you who are unsure where Hounslow is, we're in West London, and our border is on the border of Heathrow, so it's not directly in our borough. And you can imagine at the beginning of the pandemic, the significant impact that that had on our economy, which had been the second fastest growing in London, and the extent to which that changed the complexion of our economy, and actually then led us into a very detailed piece of work around recovery in its broadest sense. So recovery in Hounslow, We really wanted to be bold and ambitious for our residents and really be at the vanguard for change. So working in partnership with residents, with business, with key partners, with the voluntary and community sector, we built our recovery programme. And that culminated in a borough conference in September 2020 with around 250 participants from right across the borough. And this is about how we build a fairer, greener, stronger borough. And you can see within it, green recovery is a hugely important part of that, and particularly about how we can use it to renew and stimulate our economy, how we can diversify our economy, how we can use it to tackle local inequalities, empower local residents, and ultimately reimagine our local places. In the context of our green recovery, what we've done is we've put together a set of demonstrators. So like many London boroughs, we declared a climate emergency, but actually COVID added an additional complexity, I think, around climate and the impact that it was having on our different communities. And therefore, we really wanted to stretch our ambition. So focusing on how we can create 21st century mobility, low carbon neighbourhoods, green growth. One key aspect of that was how do we create a low carbon economy so that our reliance on Heathrow, transport, logistics could be broadened and therefore giving us greater resilience for the future. And part of that you'll see in there is about how we promote and enable a circular economy. And that is hugely important to us about how we begin to embed that beyond the organisation and actually into activities right across the borough. I will stress that we are still at the start of our journey, so I don't have all the answers, but what I can do is give you a start point, I think, very much sharing the learning that we've undertaken. So we had some great successes more broadly about green recovery, but just, which I think has given us a narrative and a conversation that we have both internally and with our residents. And we've got a particular community reference group around climate that are really active in the circular economy space as well. So some of the things that we have done, you know, we've got a very clear commitment around circular economy. And as part of our Environment and Climate Community Summit, just before COP26, we held 4 breakout sessions to introduce the circular economy and beyond recycling to our residents and to officers in the room. And that was a really, really fantastic opportunity, really productive sort of conversations, really demonstrated that actually whilst residents might not call it circular economy, they absolutely understand the concept of it and how it can work for us in our borough. So we talked about how we can develop circular economy hubs as part of our reduction and recycling plan, increasing activities around training, access to healthy food, the role of transport, the community and the social connection, what refill shops or sharing libraries, repair and reuse workshops and opportunities might look like for our borough. Recognising that to deliver that, we need to bring our organisation with us. We held a very, very practical workshop in November with 25 senior officers from right across the organisation to think about how we embed circular economy into our services and into the outcomes that we want to deliver as an organisation. So it came up with all the things that you might expect. So how do we embed circular economy into our procurement practices, into planning, into construction? How do we embed it into all the relevant policies and strategies? But most importantly then, how do we make that real and how do we turn it into deliverable actions that demonstrate the role of the circular economy? So still a work in progress for us in Hounslow. What I will say is the work in West London, so that has brought together colleagues from all the West London boroughs, and we've been looking at how we can encourage a circular economy in West London. And this is part of our West London Build and Recover plan. And so we've been taking the lead through our West London Climate Officers Group to think about what does that vision for circular economy at a sub-regional level, so West London, what does that look like? And how can we use it to create new opportunities, new skills, innovation, employment, and an inclusive economy? So you'll see the vision outlined on the slide, and then to the right are sort of the themes and priorities that we want to deliver. So how do we advocate, protect, waste less, innovate and lead? And some of the really practical deliverables that we're now starting to pull together is what does that look like if we were to create a really clear resource pack for West London, and how do we use that to kickstart action on the circular economy? We've also been thinking about how do we then measure the impact of the circular economy, and what does that look like for us? So how do we really demonstrate that level of activity and some of the benefits that Wayne talked about in his slide? So it'd be really interesting to get people's perspectives on that. This is just still a work in progress, but you can see we're more at the beginning of our journey, and I think we've got a lot of ambition in Hounslow and in West London, and we're really keen to start seeing how we can start delivering real action on the ground, and how we can bring both our organisations and our residents with us on this journey. And I'm happy to take any questions at the end.
Lovely, thank you so much, Victoria. Really exciting to hear about the actions being taken to encourage the circular economy in Hounslow and West London. Now, before we move on to our final speaker, we're going to show you a short video with a really exciting example of the circular economy in action in the community.
I'm founder of The New Wardrobe, which is a social network to share fashion with women in your local area. So really how it started was I had spent some time in India, myself and my friend Ali, and I guess when we were there we were confronted firsthand with the real social and environmental impacts of the fashion industry. Returning home, you realise how your consumption habits really affect people around the world and what it's doing to the environment. And one thing that we found really difficult was finding accessible, sustainable fashion alternatives. And I guess a journey to sustainable lifestyle can sometimes be a little bit isolating. So myself and Ali just realised that as a group of friends we were actually solving this problem in our own way, and it was because we were sharing clothes. So what we were really doing was making use of the pieces that we already had in our wardrobe, and it's a place that everyone can start. What it does is it's just bringing together people in communities to have collective action, but also be able to enjoy their wardrobe and still love fashion while really doing their part for the environment. We met Advanced London at the London Circular Challenge, which was about implementing a sustainable fashion solution across the City of London, and New Wardrobe was lucky enough to win the competition, and because of that we actually got onto the Advanced London programme. This was a big game changer for our transparency and calculating our sustainability impact. For every piece that's shared on the platform, we offset the resources that would have been used in the production of a new piece that you may have bought. And what Advanced London are doing is they have developed a real-time calculator where you can calculate your carbon, water and waste offset for every piece that's shared on the platform. So what people can do is look at both their personal environmental impact and also the wider community impact. And I think it's just a great introduction into the circular economy, because people often care about climate change but they're not really sure how to get involved in it. New Wardrobe is a place where they can do that. What we really want to do with our communities in London and Dublin and Cambridge and Cork is to develop a blueprint of how New can scale globally. So we want to understand the way in which a local community works and keep hyper-local communities but do it on a global scale. So in the future what you'll be able to do is come to our New Wardrobe site and find out how you can get your own community started and how we can add you to the platform. And how the platform actually works is in every community people can sign up and become a member and upload a couple of their own pieces to share on the platform, maybe something you bought for a wedding, maybe something that you had for work and just don't get a huge amount of wear out of. And then you can borrow in the same way that you would with friends, so you just book it out for certain dates and then you arrange a collection or a bike delivery and you get to add a new piece to your wardrobe for a couple of weeks and then you return it. And with that there's an environmental impact for every share that happens.
That was New Wardrobe, a really exciting example of the circular economy in action in the community. And now I'm going to move on to our final speaker, Keith Townsend from the London Borough of Islington. Keith's going to talk about Islington's circular economy plan. After Keith speaks, there'll be an opportunity for a short Q&A. So I'd encourage you all to post any questions you might have into the chat box while Keith is giving his presentation, and there'll be an opportunity to put those to the speakers afterwards. Over to you, Keith.
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to move straight on to my next slide, which is why we think the circular economy is important to us in an Islington context. We, like many other boroughs, we declared a climate emergency in 2019. That was a political commitment. And since that time, over the following year or so, we put together our Vision 2030 strategy, which laid out how we felt we were going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. And I think the context of this in the circular economy is emissions in terms of tonnages. We know what our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are, but actually the conversation is really beginning to turn also, as Wayne started to indicate, around our total emissions, including Scope 3, and how can we start to use the circular economy to influence on that. So we think that that's where the circular economy plan comes into play, looking at that wider perspective and how that can influence behavioural change. So that's the context of our Vision 2030 strategy. And I'll lay out in the next slide, what does that actually look like? This is our governance diagram. Now, governance isn't always the most interesting thing, but what it does is lay out our core work streams. And they're shown in the coloured boxes on the bottom of the diagram here. And then the top right shows our absolute commitment to working alongside our borough partners and the GLA and ReLondon and other organisations, and indeed government departments, because I think it's vital that we have, as in local authorities, an influencing and a lobbying role, and a being clear with government what we need, but also what we can offer. So that sort of regional and national and sub-regional working is really important. But of course, as far as Islington is concerned, it's not anything just about what the council does, it's what the borough does, because our emissions represent between 4 and 8% of the total emissions of the borough as an organisation. And so it's that collective work. So where does this all fit together? Well, under that work stream, we have our waste reduction recycling plan, which many of you will be, you will have your own for your borough. And we have a circular economy action plan. So we have a governance route by which to support this. And this programme is now being developed and built with real people and real resources to support it. So what does that mean to us going forward? Well, our action plan talks about the principles that we want to deliver against. It also identifies the actions we're already taking, because we, like many boroughs, are already actually doing projects and work around the circular economy, but it's also some additional commitments as well. So we've focused on those 8 broad areas, which more or less matches our Vision 2030 strategy. But embedding is really key. Wayne mentioned it earlier on. We think that there's an opportunity to embed circular economy into numerous other policies and strategies, and that's what we have committed to do. This is the route, the journey we've taken over the past year or so. It's been coordinated through our recycling team, a huge amount of internal engagement associated with that to get commitment from others. That's the secret, I think, to our Vision 2030 strategy. I'm not implementing it, me personally. It is being implemented by several workstream leads that are senior officers from across the organisation. And this is the same principle that we've adopted with the circular economy plan. It isn't a team of circular economy folk that do it. It's an organisation and a borough that can implement this along with our partners. And we're just at the point where we are going to publish. So in essence, you're a little bit in advance that the rest of the organisation is. That's going through our governance process for approval, which is a statement that we're starting on this journey. And it is a journey, and I think it will iterate over time. Just some of the achievements. I'm not going to talk about too many of these, but I am going to pick out 1 or 2 things that I think are noteworthy, because we're rather proud of them. We've retrofitted our first RCV. We took a diesel RCV and we've turned it into an electric one. And it works, and it's out there being used to collect waste and recycling in our borough. So the idea of upcycling goes down well with the certain middle classes in Islington, but actually there's a really important message. It's cheaper, it's using the asset that we already own, and it's reusing it. So the chassis and the wheels and everything else and the cab is being reused. We've just stripped out everything to do with fossil fuels. So that's a key part of our strategy going forward. And going back to the library of things, in some respects, this is all ReLondon's fault. ReLondon and LedNet did a bringing together of circular economy digital innovators several years ago. And the library of things was one that really resonated with me. And I'm rather pleased that we've just implemented this in Islington. And we're going to look to see how we can expand on this. It's just a couple of real life examples. So our commitments going forward, again, embedding it into our policies and strategies. I could run through all of those, but there's a few examples of things that are coming or are in development, and we've got commitment to embed those, hence why it's a whole organisational piece. But I do think that then the tangible deliverables of that will flow from that, but the principles of getting this embedded, I think is really, really important. That just gives you a range and a breadth of those strategies. So, for example, our new homes guide about how we develop and build our new homes is looking much more broadly than just energy efficiency. It's looking at design and layout, how that supports the circular economy, just as examples. So in actions, I'm just going to pick out some of the examples here. I've talked about what we've called the ERCVs. We are going to retrofit 8 of those, which is a far better use of resources, and I said reusing our assets. But we are also looking to reduce our overall fleet size. For a relatively small end of London Borough, we have an enormous fleet, and we really must look to change behaviour and reduce that fleet where possible. We're also going to launch a circular economy grant scheme that's been approved, and that's for small businesses working in partnership with colleagues here at ReLondon. And we think that actually the sustainability awards that we hold ought to celebrate circular economy too. So that's about the other end of this. It's celebrating everybody else's successes. So we think that's a really positive thing that we are committing to do. And also around actions around our own buildings and our own assets, which we're looking at in great detail. So in terms of picking up a couple of the other themes, we're working, as you would expect us to do, on reuse. We think reuse is a real opportunity on all sorts of levels, both directly and working with businesses, and that is starting to happen into real tangible projects that we are delivering on in our borough. Our anchor institutions are really important to us. So we're working with Arsenal and the NHS and others, again, to work with us on circular economy based actions within their organisations, and repair cafes and building up adult learning skills so that people can actually repair stuff. There's some interesting statistics about how many people know how to actually wire a plug, because you don't need to anymore, and how to change a fuse and how to repair things as opposed to buy another one. Really interesting about how adult learning can support that. So you can see what we're trying to do is get the reach of the whole of the organisation to help us deliver this, along with organisations in our borough. Our next steps, we think that we're going to need to keep horizon scanning on all of this. And we need to learn about what we introduce and see how we can expand on it and develop it going forward. We've done a huge amount on internal and external awareness raising. People do get this. They just don't quite understand the phrase circular economy necessarily, but they understand it in other terminology. But that's an interesting one. Our next stage is also around trying to measure this a little bit more tangibly, not just in terms of carbon, but in other ways. And so what we've committed to doing, we publish our circular economy plan early in 2022, which will then do a refresh thereafter in 2024. So hence why I think it's an iteration, and this will get more sophisticated as time goes on, as we learn, as others learn. But it feels it's a really, really important statement for us as part of our Vision 2030 overall programme. Thank you very much. And of course, happy to take questions along with the rest of the panel.
Okay, thanks, Keith, for that fantastic presentation. Victoria also, and we're seeing some really good practical examples of how different circular economy business models are being applied across both local authorities, whether it's embedding circularity in their core policy and their core functions, so allowing the authority to walk the walk, if you like, but also some examples of community engagement and empowering the circular citizen to come out and engage through share and repair programs, and then also through business engagement, with Keith talking about working with small businesses to help them to better understand and to scale up and adopt more circular economy business models. So really good to see the mix of activity across those business models. We've got a few minutes now just for a bit of Q&A. So our panelists very kindly offered their time to respond as best they can. I'm just going to start, if I may, just with Keith, just coming from your presentation. You talked a lot about that coordination across different departments to really empower people across those different departments to engage. What do you sort of put that success down to? Why do you think people engage so well on this topic?
When we started the approach, I mean, it really started with the Vision 2030 strategy. We wanted to engage the whole organisation, and we started that by having a political engagement, because it was a politically led policy around the climate emergency. We worked with the entire senior politician cohort, the executive, as we call it, or cabinet, as it will be known elsewhere. And so the leader made it very, very clear at the time that he expected all lead members to participate in that. And I think that helped set a sort of a policy direction, that this really was a borough policy and not a departmental one or even a council one. And that really helped. But actually, we worked incredibly hard to build that governance model around people that actually were best placed to deliver it. So the work stream on buildings and housing is led by one of our directors of housing, for example. So you've got a real tangible lead on that, and they've developed a team sitting underneath them of their experts, supported by our net zero carbon program. So there's been a huge amount of engagement and a huge amount of support and additional capacity and additional investment that's given us the best possible chance of making it work.
Fantastic, thank you. So you're seeing leadership at the very top and have that trickle down to the rest of the organisation. Clearly very important. Okay, so our first question from the audience, and Wayne, I'm going to give this one to you. I think it's a good fit there. Would the circular economy stand up against the market economy? And I think that means the market-led economy.
Okay, I mean, I think this is the point I was trying to make, really, that, you know, when I was a young lad starting out in the waste sector, these two things seem to be diametrically opposed, you know, and the O-level question, that shows how old I am, the GCSE question was, can capitalism be sustainable? And that was like, oh, I don't know, you know, that's a tricky one to answer. Well, the circular economy, I think, it is the answer to that. It's using market economics and the market economy, and deploying the business models that we've talked about at scale, to use the market to help redistribute resources so that we don't have to extract virgin resources. That's what it's all about. That is essentially what it's all about. And over time, our economy will transition more towards those kind of redistributive, regenerative businesses. And that's the game that we're all in. So to do anything other would mean we have to have some kind of command and control economy. And we're not saying that. But we do have to expect that the government, citizens and business all play their part in this transition, because if there's if one party is not pulling their weight, if the government aren't making the right policies, if people aren't changing their behaviour, if business doesn't come forward fast enough, then I suspect we'll have change imposed upon us. So I'm an optimist, and I believe the circular economy does give us a way to respond to the climate emergency and the climate crisis in a way that is economically, not just economically viable, but is regenerative, and will enable us all to thrive, both economically and socially.
Okay, thank you. Next one is coming in from Sujal, and I'm going to put this to you, Victoria, I think it's a good one, the context of your presentation. In terms of the 5 business models, do you envision that certain models are more difficult for local authorities to implement than others? And if the case, how do we make sure that we rectify those gaps in understanding to make our actions, make sure that they're systematic across the economy?
Thanks. Well, there's quite a lot in that question, Doug, so I might have to get you to repeat some of it.
So, I think we're breaking through.
So I guess no, it's fine. I'll start, and then you can tell me if I've missed anything. I guess my initial reaction is it's actually quite helpful to have a variety of different models, because I think it's to take into account that not all of the places are the same, and the way in which we will want to tackle things will be the same. So I think actually having a mixed circular economy, if I can say it like that, is absolutely the right thing to do. Now you might have to give me a quick nudge, Doug, on the questions.
Sure. So the second part was, if there are gaps in understanding of the different business models, how do we make sure that we rectify those gaps to make sure that our actions are systematic across the economy?
Yeah, no, absolutely great question. And I think that's the stage in the journey that we are in Hounslow, and to an extent in West London. And I think one of the things that we've been working very hard to do is to think about how we address those gaps. So in my presentation, part of it was about how we make this real for people. I think all of the speakers, Wayne and Keith, have alluded to the fact that circular economy might not actually mean very much to people. I mean, it's difficult enough when you ask people about what climate change means. So I think there's a lot more that we need to do about that understanding. And I think when we've done that part around awareness, training, etc., I think that's when you'll be able to identify any of the gaps in business models and understanding, and then be able to address those. I think one of the things that we've been able to proactively do in Hounslow is we've got a community reference group, and they're a really great group to talk to bounce off where we are, where they feel that the understanding is within the community more broadly. And I think that helps us keep our work, I guess, very real and simple for our communities to understand. So hopefully I've answered them.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've got one for you, Keith, in terms of emissions. How do we translate small scale action like the share and repair community schemes into actual reductions in emissions and good use of resources?
Okay, I mean, I think there's two parts of that. Firstly, I think most folk realise once they've embraced some of the reuse schemes, like the library of things, that it just makes sense. It actually just makes practical sense. Why would I ever go and buy a drill that I'm ever going to use once, ever? And actually, that just makes sense to people on one level. In terms of how we measure that is a real challenge at the moment. Through London Environment Directors Network, through the digital innovation piece of work, there are a number of boroughs that are piloting using some software called Climate View. And that's designed to try and help places measure carbon interventions, if you like, interventions they want to make to reduce carbon, and put in proxy measures to help us illustrate how progress is being made. Because one of the big challenges with carbon data is, one, it's a couple of years out of date, and it's very, very global. And this is a tool that's attempting to help local authorities think that through. It's very much in pilot phase at the moment, and there are emerging other digital innovators getting into this space to help us turn this into something that is tangible and measurable with proxy indicators. So I think there's on two levels. One, it's practicality, and secondly, it's around there are tools that are being developed at the moment that local authorities are leading on piloting that are going to help us not only help the organisation measure, but to help the borough understand progress.
Great, thank you, Keith. Okay, just time for one more question. I see firstly Annie's asked about the Library of Things, but Matthew has kindly responded to that question. Thank you, Matthew. Final question, come back to you, Wayne. How can we motivate small businesses to start the transition to the circular economy?
I mean, traditionally there's a variety of ways. At ReLondon, we offer support to businesses who want to embark upon this journey, small to medium enterprises who want to embark upon this journey. And the support we offer actually isn't traditional environmental advice; it's business advice. So it's business support. So it might be we could broker a feedstock that some other companies using as waste, for example, which we've done in the past, or we can help you find markets or investment for your product. So that's one way in which we can do that. There's grants, and the Mayor of London recently put some money into the market through the Green New Deal, his Green New Deal fund. Islington, you've heard from Keith, are doing something similar at the local level. So that's another way in which you can do this. And then you talk about measuring behaviour change. The other side of that is providing citizens with the tools that they need in order to change their behaviour. At ReLondon, we're developing a circular economy directory, which hopefully will give citizens a list of SMEs that we've worked with or who we know are deploying circular economy business models that will then enable citizens to change their behaviour and use services or products developed by SMEs locally. So that could be digital applications. It could be something that's just designed to be last a long time and be repairable. I'm waiting for the day, by the way, that shirts become modular, and then I can kind of change. They used to be, didn't they? So these are things, and talking about skills as well. We need to learn new skills. So I'm about to embark upon a year of not buying clothes, so I need to learn how to darn socks. So there are people out there who provide these services, who provide reskilling services. So, providing citizens with access to tools that can help them change their behaviour, aligned with giving them information as to how that behaviour is contributing to the overall picture, enables a mixed economy of circular economy businesses to multiply in a region. And in London, it's a particularly fruitful place for circular economy businesses to deploy.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Okay, that concludes our Q&A. Thank you to our speakers for taking those questions. So that leaves it for me just to round up for the last 5 minutes, just to do a quick pitch really for the Academy. So we are launched now. We are taking registrations for training modules, and we'll be rolling those out from January of next year. It is a package of practical expert-led training activities designed to help local authorities embed the circular economy into everything they do. The website is there if you want to take a look at those modules, and they've just been dropped into the chat as well. And just to help us get an idea of where our local authorities are and the interest side, we've got these two modules we're starting with. The first is a practical module, half-day workshop to help local authorities understand the circular economy and how to apply it in a very practical way to its existing and new programs and policies and projects. And the second is the first of what we hope will be a number of bespoke modules. This is a procurement module, a full-day workshop, which is focusing on helping local authorities to embed the circular economy into its procurement activities. And that could be its policy documents, its strategy, also more on a practical level, how to embed circularity into high-spend categories, how to understand which contract offer the greatest opportunity to trial circular economy approaches, pilots, and projects. So they're the two at a very sort of high level, what those two workshops are doing. We are taking registrations now, and I think just to give us an idea of where the audience is on this journey, just a quick snap poll just to get an indication of whether these might be of interest to you. It's a closed poll, of course, that just helps us to understand where there is appetite or otherwise. So I'll just leave that poll open now for the next 10 seconds, and please indicate your interest in one of or both of those modules. And we'll keep that module, we'll keep it open for a bit longer as well for people to post their answers. Just give it a few more seconds. Final chance, folks. Okay, we'll close it there. So that brings you to close the session. Thank you to all our speakers for giving their insights into how they're applying the circular economy. And of course, thank you to all the participants for engaging so well in the evening. Have a good evening, and this session will be recorded and will be posted on the website. Thank you.